today it's about now state management with useReducer. So how do you use reducer? So useReducer is another React hook, but instead of directly updating the value, you dispatch an action. So it's like maybe the Redux Lite. If you have ever worked with the Redux, so it's like a Redux Lite version of Redux, and but it's built in React. So this helps organize your logic, especially when you have a many state transition. So these transitions are now the dispatch, the actions you have in that hook or the component. And how do you uh, use reducer? It is the same way we import useState from React. So you import the use reducer as a named export, and then you return the two variables which a use reducer gives you, which is now the count or the state and a dispatch function. Instead of now a setup function, it will be a dispatch. So this dispatch now will be having different state transition depending on the actions you have in application. Someone is on mute. Wang. Okay. So this dispatch is not like a usual setup function that we have in useState. So it handles your state differently. And now this counter reducer is where you have your reducer or the slices or the actions you want whenever you call this what? Dispatch. So this dispatch is also a function, but it handles your actions instead of mutating your state directly. So this dispatch gets a dispatch action. So that dispatch action calls the counter reducer. So this counter reducer, which is also a function that now has a switch case. So that switch case checks the action you are dispatching. So if it's like an action like to increment by 1, so it does now that function of incrementing your state by 1. If the dispatch dispatches an action like decrease by 1 in the count or the state, so it's a cause that checks the case that has what, or the action that has decreased the state by 1. Then it decreases your count with what? 1. If you want to reset, so in the dispatch, you dispatch an action like reset. So that reset goes to the counter reducer. At that the counter reducer, it has a switch case. So it's checked the first case, which is increase by 1. So your second case is decrease by 1. Then the third case is now maybe the reset case, which is the action. So that case does now resetting your what? Your state. That is how a useReducer hook operates. And the next thing is now like something like this. So there are things to understand when it comes to a useReducer. So whenever you destructure whatever a useReducer gives you, which is the state and the dispatch function, then you call the reducer, then you pass two things. The use state we only passed the initial what? What did we pass on the use state? On the use state function, we only passed the initial value like 0. If it's a string, you pass a what? An empty what? String. But on use reducer, it expects two parameters. So the two parameters, this is now the function that has the actions. So it is a function you define somewhere separate, and that reducer now expects two parameters, which is the state and what? The action. So whenever now those actions you have here, like the first action can be of type increment. So you will use the switch statement here. So this switch statement, you will check the first case, maybe now this increment. So if the type or the dispatch function that is dispatching an increment switch case, that is where you do the functionality of taking your state and adding a what? One in that state. If you have another switch case for maybe you want to dispatch a decrement. So the decrement will come to the function. So this function will check the case that has a decrement. So the decrement is now we take the same state, subtract what? 1. Then, of course, the second argument in the use reducer is your initial value or the start point of your state. It must start from somewhere, like the age for this is at age 42. So if I want to increment that age, I will have to dispatch a function like increment age, which will call this function. So this dispatch will call this reducer and check the statement or the switch which has an increment. Then with that, so the parameters. So the reducer is a function that specifies what? How the states get updated. So it must be pure and it should take the state and actions as arguments. That is the guardian you use when working with a use reducer. So the function, the reducer, only takes the state, which is now the state you are having here, and an action. So the action is the thing you want to do, like incrementing, that is an action. Decrementing, that is an action. Resetting, that is an action. Like maybe doubling your state by 2, that is an action. It should be must be pure in terms of it only takes the only two parameters, and it should return what? The next what? A state, which is now like if you add state plus 1, the new state will be what? Maybe if the age was 42, if I add 1 plus 42, it will be 40 what? So 42.3 will be our new what? State, which now will be updated in this state of ours. So that is what is happening. It should return what? The new state. So the state and action can be of any type. So it's all about you to know what to type with these two variables you're passing there. So the value from which the initial state is calculated from, which is now the initial value, whatever you are talking, the way you pass this as the initial value. So this is an object, which is an initial value. Then it can be value of any type, the way we did yesterday. It can be an object, it can be an array, it can be a string, it can be a what? Boolean. Then the dispatch now, which is our function here, lets you update the state to a different value and trigger what? A re-render in your component. So you need to pass the action as the only argument to the dispatch what? Function. So the dispatch function will only accept the action you are passing. So it won't accept any other thing. So the use reducer is a hook. So you only call it at the top of your component or your own hook. So you can't call it inside a what? This is a thing to consider when working with hook. You cannot call a hook inside a loop or a codation. So it must be at the top level of your component before defining other logics. So if you need that, you can extract the new component and move the state into it. So you don't want a situation where your hook is inside loops, things like a for loop for each. You don't want your reducer a hook to be like that. So an architecture of what happens behind the hook when working with use reducer. So at the component level, we have the event handler. So the event handler is now the use reducer, which is now the dispatch and the states. So on that dispatch, so you dispatch a what? an action. We said the dispatch function only accepts action as the only parameter. So that dispatches an action like increment by 1, decrement by 1, reset. So that is an action you can define. Then once it dispatches that action, it calls now the reducer. So the reducer is what? The functions that specify how the state to be what? Gets updated. Then once that is done, the reducer now sets the new what? State. Remember the reducer says we saying it returns the new what? The new state. Now that new state is what you render in where? In your component. So that is the cycle that happens when you have a what? I use reducer. And that is what you want now to implement in our code and see how we can work with a use reducer. Unless anyone has a question up to that point.
Yes,
Yes.
just one question I would ask. Since the reducer is very complex compared to the use state, what what instances is one should one use a reducer instead of a use state?
We will get there once we use both of them and see when to use this, when to use this.
Yeah, okay.
So on my same folder that I work on, so the week 7, I will have a new folder, which is now I use reducer book. So and the thing to notice when I'm creating my new folders, I'm not having spaces between my letters. If I want to have a space, I would rather add an hyphen or an underscore. That's something to note. So let me open this with terminal. Then I can initialize a React project. So pnpm create a void. So this void should be of the same name as my folder name. Then the package name should also be the folder name. Then it should be of React. The variant is TypeScript. Then we don't want to roll down. We want to install the dependencies and start the server. Okay, once that is done, I want to open this with the VS Code. And this is our project. Then let me start the server. So pnpm run dev. So it's running on port 5173. So we have it there. Then let me put side by side. So where to start? Of course, in our app.tsx file. So that is where we start from. Then what we did yesterday, the useState. So the useState as a state and a setter function. So the setter function mutate the state directly without even having that dispatch. But the useReducer updates your state in a different way by dispatching an action, and the action passes that action to a reducer function, and the reducer function updates the state and the returns a new state. Then we get that. So let's remove this. remove this, remove this. Just a minute. So whatever we need, we said first of all is always to import the library or the function. So it's a named export, which is use what? Reducer. Kindly check it's a camel case function that is being imported. So you need to be careful when importing those function. It's a camel case function, which is the first letter of the first word is in small or lowercase. Then the second one in that name, it's a capital, the first letter. Then once we import, so in your function, you need now to destructure the two values, which is now what? What does state as? So they use reducer. It has the state and a what? A dispatch function. So this dispatch function, you want now to use reducer. So this use reducer, it expects some two things, which is the reducer, which is the previous state, and a what? The initial state or the initial value of your use reducer. So we will define them very shortly. And the first thing we want to do is a counter reducer, the one we had yesterday for incrementing. Like when I click a button to increment by one, when I click the button for decrementing, I want to reduce that by one. So the first thing is now to define that reducer. So at the top here, it's a function. So this is the step one of defining that. So the step one is now to define your reducer, where your actions will be deciding on. So this can be maybe count reducer because we can have many reducers. So the count reducer is just a normal function. So function, we can call it count reducer or the counter reducer. So this counter reducer, I think it should be, let's say, the count reducer to just be. So this count reducer is a function, transitional function. Then we send a reducer expects two parameters, which is the state and a what? An action. So those are the two things a reducer should expect. And then the function to do that. So in that function, that is where you use the switch statement. So the switch statement will help you switch over or loop through the actions you have in your what? In your reducer. And that's how do we define a switch statement? So we define the switch statement with this switch keyword, then you pass the codation. So the codation I want to pass is now the action we have here. So on this action, we want to have those actions there. And those actions, they can be of different cases. So I want to have those, maybe case one, if you remember a switch statement. So you use the case to have the first case maybe for increment. So that is the first action I want to have, increment. If I'm doing an increment, what am I doing? So I should return what? I should return the new state, which is now we take the previous state, this the one we are passing here. So that state, then we add what? One. That is the first case. So what about now the second case? If the second case action should be what? decrement. So what should we do with decrement? We should return what? We should return the previous state, which is this one, the state, and decrement by what? By 1. So that is what we should do there. Then the next thing is another case, like reset case. So the reset case. What should we do with the reset case? We should return what? 0. Yes, because you are resetting what? This state. Then remember switch case should have a default what? Case. So this default case, we just only want to return the state, this one. So you only want to return that state there. So whenever now you'll be passing an action through our dispatch. So it will be coming checking. So is action of type increment? Yes. Return the state, then add 1. If the dispatch is of type what? Decrement. Do what? Return the state, you subtract what? 1. So you get that. If the dispatch action is what? Is this. So return this default. Then now we need a way to type what? Our argument. So a state, we are dealing with a what? Incrementing and decrementing a what? A number, right? So the state should be of type what? A number. What about an action? So an action, you want to type it with an object. So this object should be now the type of the action we want to pass. And that action should be of type what? String. Why? Because that is what we are checking. So an increment is a string, decrement is a string, reset is a what? String. So you want to type now this action as an object of type what? String. So whenever now we'll be checking the action, so action is an object, so we can access the key, which is what? Type. So on action, we'll be doing action dot what? Type. So if is action dot type of increment, do this. If action type decrement, return this. If action of type, so we have typed our action with an object, which is now you whenever you want to access that. So the action, if you see, it's an action of object. So we want to access this key, which is type. That is what you are passing here. So then we check there. Then below here, we can have the initial state. So we can define it as a what? A variable, normal variable. So we can have maybe this is step 2, which is the initial state. So this initial state, how do we define it? So it can be const a variable. So const the initial state. Let me have it there. So the initial state can be 0, so that we can be able to pass here. So the use reducer, we said expect what? The reducer and a what? The reducer and the initial what? State. These two things here. The previous state and the initial state. So the reducer is what? This function here. So that is what we should pass in this. So the count what? Reducer. Then the next thing is what? The initial what? State, which is now a number because we have this here. So we can have it there. We can pass it directly here to be 0, but we want to have a variable name that we can pass it here. So instead of that, we can have now that initial state. And with that now, we have fully implemented the actual way use reducer should be. So the use reducer should have the state, the dispatch. So this dispatch will be calling the counter reducer. This counter reducer will be expecting a state and a what? An action. So the state is now the current state we are having here, which is this. then the action. So this dispatch, wherever we'll be calling this function, we must pass the action so that the counter reducer can know which case to use when dispatching what? That action. So the next thing now is to implement that in our return, where we returning the JSX or the TSX. So how can we do that? So I want to have my div here. So a div HTML element. And this div, we can have some maybe simple styling to make it look well. So we have some padding, background and max width, something like that. So it is what I want, like the background to be of this color. Then inside our div, which is this one. So let me save it well. So inside our div, I want to have an H3. So this H3 can say whatever we are learning. So we are learning what? useReducer what? Count hook demo. We can have it there, which is the useReducer what? Count hook demo. And then the next thing is now maybe to display the counter reducer here. So display the count reducer here. So how do we want to display this? So we want to have an H2 element. So this H2, we want to maybe have that counter. So the counter value, which is now our initial value here, we pass what? The JSX to pass that the state. So the state is what we are displaying. And this state, remember, the initial state is what? This one, which is 0. So if we have that there, we should see our initial state here, which is 0. If we pass it as 100 or 10, that is what should be returned in our state here. So with that now, let me make it just 0 to start from there. So this can have some styling, maybe background or margin bottom, like that, to have a color of black and a margin bottom. So we can have our counter value there. So the next thing is to now have the controls, like maybe the 3 buttons for what we have in our actions. We can have a button to increment, a button to decrement, and a button to do what? To reset. So just below here, we want to have those controls. So these controls, they are just buttons. So I'll just place them in one div. On that div, I want to have maybe text align in the center and a margin bottom of 25 pixels. So that is what I want in this div. So inside the div, I want now to have the 3 buttons. So I want to have a button, and this button, I want to have 3 of them for resetting, decrementing, and what? So the first one can be of what? Decrement. So we can have that decrement text there. Then the next one can be of what? Increment. Then the other one is about what? Resetting. So I have the 3 buttons. So whenever I click the first, I want to decrease by 1. If I want to increase by 1, I want to click this. Then once we have our 3 button, we want now to listen to the event of these what? Buttons. So on the first button, which is what? On click. So on click, you want now to pass a callback function. So this is how we pass a callback function. So this callback function, we want now to call the dispatch what? Function. So we call the dispatch function there. Then on this dispatch function, We want to pass a what? You see what even the intelligence is telling us? The dispatch should only pass an action as the what? The argument. So which is an object. So we can pass it this way. So we open the curly braces, then we pass the type of what? The action we want to do what? To pass. So when doing a decrement through our counter with the help of our counter reducer, which type should we pass? Is it increment, decrement, reset? We are doing a decrement, a -1. So we should pass which type? Decrement. So I should pass that here in this type. Then we do that. Um, they should be a string. So make sure to have the quotation mark. So with that now, our button should work as expected. If I click this button, so I expect what? A decrement, because we are dispatching an action of what? Decrement. So the decrement is coming on the counter reducer. So the dispatch is passing an action. That action is calling this counter reducer. So this counter reducer is this function here. So this function is expecting the state and what? The action. So once you are calling that, since we have the state here in the useReducer, so it's checking your action. So the action is the one we have defined, the action we have dispatched, which is this decrement. So what is it returning? Our state, which is this state we have already in this useReducer, we minus what? 1. Same case if we decrement this or increment this. So the rest now should be the same. So the second button on click, callback function, then we call our what? Our dispatch again. So the dispatch is a function, then we pass the action, which is type what? Type what? Increment. Make sure to be of the same spelling with the what you have in your case statement. That way, if it's resetting, it's the same. So let me just copy this, paste in our button there. Then instead of increment, we do a what? Reset. So I have my three buttons. For doing what? Let me refresh this. So if I decrement, I increment, and I reset. So that is how you do a useReducer by dispatching what? Actions. So the next thing is maybe to have another instance of useReducer. The same thing we did yesterday of like how you can change mode using the useState. So we can use that the same in the useReducer. So how can we do that? The second thing here is another reducer. So we want to define what? A mode what? Reducer. We want to define another mode reducer. So this define mode reducer is just a function. This function, we can call it mode reducer. And the same function expects two things, which is the state and a what? An action. So this action is of type object. We want to pass the type of that action we want to pass there of what? Type what? String. So the string, the state should be, we are now dealing with the emojis, which is a string. So also a string there. Then we define our switch statement. So we want to switch over the types we have here in the action. So the action dot what? The type. Then the first case. So the first case is maybe if I'm happy. If I'm happy, I want to return this car emoji of being happy. So this car emoji of being happy. Let me see whether I can get that emoji. Maybe like that. Then if I have another case of maybe excited. So excited, we can have this emoji of being excited. This one. I have that emoji there. Then I can have another case of maybe to be calm. So the calm, we want to return this emoji of this one. Then we can have a case for sand. So the sad, we can return this emoji. Then the last one, maybe being hungry, we can return this kiss or return this what? Emoji. If we do not have any, we need to have a default what? Case. And the case should always return what? The state. So we return what? That state. So that is what we have. We have our case 1, case 2, case 3, case 4, and case 5, our default state. Then we need now to use our mode what? Reducer. So this was the counter reducer. Then we want to have another, which is mode what? Reducer. How can we do that? The same way. So we destructure the two values, which is now instead of calling the states, this can be any value, which is now the mode. Excuse me, the mode and the dispatch. So the dispatch, we are getting them from where? The use reducer. So this use reducer, we need to pass what? Our reducer function, which is what? Is mode reducer. So we want to pass mode reducer, then the initial what? Mode we want to have. We can just return the first mode, which is that emoji there. Then this should be of different name. So if you check here, cannot declare what? A broke what? Scope. So the one dispatch is not a keyword. So it's just a name to say you are dispatching a what. So this can be set what? Mode. And still be the same, the set like a dispatch function. So if you check the type of that, it should be an action dispatch from React. So once we do that, we want to use this now. So this should, we can have it below our this. So we can have another maybe H3. So this H3 can be just below our buttons here. And instead of now count should be what? The mode hook, the use reducer mode hook. That is what we want to showcase there at the bottom. Then the first thing is also now to return the state first. So how can we do this? So the same way we did here, we displayed what? We displayed the counter. So the same case here, we will display what? The mode. So in the mode value, so this should be the mode value. So this mode value should be what? Now the mode we have in our what? Reducer, this one. So mode. If we do that, of course, now the initial mode, which is the one we are passing here, is what's being displayed here. Then the next thing is now to have buttons to display what? A different what? Mode. How can we do that? So below our mode, let's have a div. So this div will have maybe the 5 button. How many reducers do we have cases? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can have the 5 buttons here. So 5 buttons, 5 buttons like this. So we have the first button, the second button, the third button, and the fourth button. That's it. We can give it some styling in this div. So we give it that styling. Then each button should have on click what. So let me just type them, or maybe we first of all and the content. So the first button can be of RP. So we have that text there of RP. The excited, the second button. Then the third button to be of what? Come. The fourth to be of what? Sad. Then the last one should be of what? Angry. So if we have now our 4 buttons, I'm not focusing on the merge and the styling first, but we want anytime we click this button, we want to update our mood with that we have there. So on this 5 button, we'll do the same thing, which is on click what? Event. So I want to edit all the buttons at the same time this way. So I want to call on click what? Event. So on this click event, we want to pass a callback function this way. So this callback function, we want to set now to call what? The set mood dispatch function, which we have where? In our reducer. So let's see set mode dispatch. So the set mode dispatch, we will accept a what? An action, which is of what type what? String. So this one now is a function that expect an action of type what? So this type should be now of this quotation mark there. So that is where now you pass each what? Action. So the first action is what? Happy. So when I want, whenever I click the first button, I want to dispatch action of what? Of what? Happy. The second should be what? Excited. The third one should be what? Calm. The fourth should be what? Sad. And the last one should be what? Angry. And with that now, if I come to my application and try to now click each what? Button, they should dispatch the action, whether with the correct what? Mode. If I click calm, I'm getting what? The mode calm. If I click sad, I'm getting what? The mode sad, the mode to be sad. If it's excited, I'm getting what? The excited mode being updated. If I want to be angry, I click that. So that is what is happening there. And if you remember, each component in React is independent. Whenever you are clicking here, we are not affecting the counter reducer because this is another what? Component. So each component runs on independent way. So if I click happy, this should work. If I reset this, if I increase this, decrement this, and that's that. So that is how we do the use reducer. So a use case, a read one use case scenario of use reducer, we will use the same joke app to do that. So let's create a new, instead of creating a new, I want just to delete whatever we have here, but I have the code pushed to GitHub of the separate. So the demo of the use reducer and now a joke app using use reducer. So let me delete this. Oh, before we end, we can have some educational information we may want to add in this. Things like whatever Branham asked about. You have that information. Yeah, why? So the running point, I use reducer. First of all, what to remember. So it's better for complex what? State logic. Then remember it has an action. So the actions describes what to happen, like an action of increment, an action of decrement, an action of what? So mostly when login, so when you want to dispatch an action of the login, the logout, those are two the action you can dispatch when working with now the out service. If you are working in the current operation, so a create can be an action, read can be an action, an update can be what? An action, the rate can be what? An action. So the reducer is a pure function that returns what? A new state. If you call now the dispatch, it triggers what? The state what? Update. Then the cool thing with TypeScript is the type safety. Whatever you are trying to type to avoid issues and ensure the correct action is being what? Passed. So we can have the comparison between useState and useReducer just below here. So the comparison. So the useReducer is much bit complex compared to what? The useState. And it uses a multiple related state values that we'll be working on later, but a useState can only work in an independent states update. That's the big difference between the two states, hooks. So the state depends on the previous what? State. So you need to make sure you are getting the previous state, then you update that. So use state is just for quick prototyping and as the way it suggests. It's simple. Like you use it when you have a simple project, but when you have a big project that you want to dispatch multiple actions at the same time, useReducer can be that. So it needs some predictable what? State updates. And this one should be of minimal state logic. So we'll be working on both of them and see where to use this, see where to use this. Maybe you want to dispatch multiple states at the same time. useReducer will be best for that. If I want just to independent update a state, I'll use a useState. So with that now, let's quickly do a joke hub with a useReducer. And before that, we go that we have these reducers, and in most cases, if you come across a React project, this work is on app.tsx, but it's always nice to clean or to make your app.csx as simple as possible. So what we do with these reducers function, we place them in a folder, an external folder within the source folder. Then we call them where? In our what? In our app.tsx, because this is a separate function. It's independent from this. So we can use the export and import module to do that. So in our source folder, we create a folder called what? Reducers. So these reducers now, you can have these reducers. So I can have the first to be what? The mood what? The reducer. So my question is, what should be the file extension for this file? What should be the file extension? It should be TS or JS, not TSX. Why am I saying this? This is a function and it's not returning a JSX as of this application or this function. We have the function app. So the function app is returning a JSX like the React component. But this function is just a normal what? Function. So it should not be saved as a what? .tsx component. It should be a ts what? File. The other one is about which file? The count what? Reducer. .ts. So the mode, we need to now remove this from here. So copy this function, cut, then place it in this file, which is this one. Then remember, we need to do what? Export what? We can do export default, then the name, which is the mode what? Reducer. So in our app, wherever we have this mode reducer, if I come here and control space, I should be able to get that intelligence of importing what? That use mode reducer, this one. So we have removed this from here. So same case with our counter what? Reducer. Remove it from here, cut, bring it here, paste, then you can export it as a default, which is this default, then count reducer. So in our app, where you have the counter reducer, control space, then import from that counter reducers there. With that now, we have separated now the functions and the TSX, and it still works the same. So we try this is working as expected, even this is working as a what? Expected. So in most cases, you find a project with a reducers folder. Just know that function is using useReducer hook somewhere. Are you together at that point? So let's do now another use case, a real world use case of useReducer. So in this app, I will just remove whatever we have here. Same case here, and also this, and maybe I can just comment whatever we have here, but remain with useReducer because we'll be using it in our joke hub. So if you remember our joke hub, it has some values and the rest. So whatever we need to have in our useReducer now is to have a new file for what? A joke what? Reducer. So I have a joke reducer there, .ts. So this should be now a function. So can be joke reducer. So the reducers, remember, it take a state and a what? Action. That is always the two things that a reducer should take. So under now the function, we want to do something. So the joke, let's bring it here. We want to have or to switch over the actions. And our joke, remember, it had an ID, a joke, and maybe a what? A rating. So we can have an interface for that. So interface for our joke. And please remember, I said an interface should use Pascal naming convention, but a function name or a variable should use what? Camel case. So this joke interface should have an ID of number. Should have a what? The joke itself, which is a string, and a what? Maybe the rate or the rating. So let me just call it rate, which is this not string but a number. So whatever we want to pass here. So this state, we said it can be any name, the way we did in our counter reducer here in our application where we remove this, where you are passing this state. So instead of just calling state, it can be what? Jokes we have. So that's our state, which is jokes. And these jokes are of this what? Interface what? A joke. Then those jokes are many. like it's an array. So we need to indicate them with what? The square what? Brackets to indicate it's they are a joke. Then on the action. So how should we type our action? So my jokes, I want it to have three things. I want to have three types. Let me just of all define our actions here so that you can understand whatever we are doing. So in the switch statement, I want to be passing my action. And this action, remember we want to pass it as a what? Type. So this type can be now the first type can be this case of I want to add an action of what? Maybe adding a new joke. So that is the first action, which is add a what? A joke. So this action, what you should do is just a simple thing. You want to return what? The jokes we have, this one, then add a new what? Joke. So what should we do when returning this joke? Of course, it is an array, so we need to indicate the what? Array. What we are doing, we use the spread operator in TypeScript, which we are just spreading the jokes we have, this one, and under what? The new joke, which is now the add new joke we are having on that action. So what can we do that? Before we do that, we can use this joke reducer in our app and see how we can do that. So in our app.tsx, so we just come back to this, but so that we can understand what we want to do here. So in our app, we want to display those jokes. Remember, we have this interface. So I can use this interface in our app.tsx. So I want to have the interface joke and have the initial jokes. So remember, in our function, we want to have the joke what? Reducer. So this joke reducer should be const what? The joke, which is our state, which is maybe all jokes and a what? And dispatch what? Function. So the dispatch function, then this should come from where? The use reducer. Then the use reducer expect what? The reducer and the initial what? Value. So the reducer is what we are defining here. This joke what? Reducer. So let's just import or export this. So export default this joke reducer. So this joke reducer is one we should pass here. So we call that joke reducer from where? The reducers. So we import that by just tapping tab or enter in your keyboard. So we import our reducers from where? This joke reducer. Then the initial value. So the initial value is now the initial jokes you want. So I can have an array of initial what? Jokes here. So const initial jokes. So these jokes is of type an array of jokes there, which is we have there. So we can have an object of 3 initial jokes here. Let me just have them there. So we have a joke of ID1, which is this, and joke of ID number 2, and all that. So we have 3 jokes. We can type it with this joke interface here. So this joke, just to make sure it's an array. Then in our use reducer, our initial value should now be the initial what? Jokes. Are you together up that point? So this joke reducer has some issues, but we will resolve this as we go, as we continue. So in our function, the joke reducer. We want now to display those jokes in our return. So on the return, we want to have a div. So this div is where you want to display what? Those jokes. So the jokes is now this state we have here. So how can we do that? So we can check for jokes. If we have jokes and use the double ampersand just to confirm that we have initial, like if we have 0, we do not want to display something. But if we have those jokes, we want now to display the jokes. So we call the jokes that we have this one, which is an array. Then it's an array. So if I use dot, I should be able to get all the function. I can do that. And what do I want to do? I want to map our what? Our joke with each joke, then pass it in our callback function. So this should be, we want to pass each joke in this callback function. Yes.
Yeah, maybe you go back a little bit to the joke reducer.
We cannot hear you.
I'm saying,
Yes.
maybe you go back to the joke reducer.
Uh,
Maybe I'm lost a little bit there.
yeah.
On how we are living to the function joke reducer.
Mm.
You take the jokes, then the food column, joke, then an array. I didn't understand how you come up with that. You came up with that.
Okay, so let's first of all do this. Let's first of all comment this and not pass anything here. So we just have the joke reducer, then the actions, we'll do them later. Whatever you have here is just an interface to type our what? The jokes. So the jokes, I want them to be an array form. Remember the whatever we have here in the app.tsx, we are having these initial jokes, which is an array of what? Objects, which is the first joke, second joke, and third what? Joke. So don't focus much on what we have here, but we first of all want to render these jokes in our what? In our browser. So remember we talked about the components. So under the source folder, I want to create a what? Component. And the component I want to create is a joke what? Component. So let me create that joke component. So this joke component should be a TSX now because it's a component that will be returning a JSX thing. So on the joke component, I want to export the joke component. So RFACE to get that boilerplate for what? For a joke component. So this joke component, remember we should pass what? Some parameters. And I want to pass the joke itself, which is an array, then maybe an function to increment the rate of that joke. So we can have this increase what? Rate, and maybe to decrease the rating of that joke. Then in this, inside this return function or the return of GSX, we want just to return a div with maybe the class name joke. We can use this to style that div. Then inside this, I want to return out another div, which we just display now that joke. So inside, I want to display something there. Then once we do that, we want another div below there. So this div should maybe return what? another JSX value there. Then after that, you want to have another div that will have the two buttons for increasing the rating and decreasing what? The rating of that joke. So we want to have two buttons. So the first button and the second button there. So this button should maybe a like button. So I can use the emoji of liking out that joke and a dislike what emoji just to showcase I'm disliking that button. So we can have some class name for this button here. Let me just style them together. So a class name of btn, then this button I want to be of small size, so we can just pass that class name there, and maybe btn data. So just don't worry about the class names that I'm passing here. They are just styling properties. So once I have this, so we are yet to use these properties. We are passing this joke component. So this joke component, the first thing I want to display here is the joke. So this joke is coming as a what? An object. So if I pass here, I should call the joke, then dot. So I'm not getting the inheritance because you have not typed what? This joke. So how can I type my joke? If you check on the app, so the joke has a what? ID, joke, and a what? The rating. So I can just reuse this in my joke component at the top there. So then type this, the first joke or the first prop in this component with this what? Joke. So I can have that as a what? It should not be typed there. We should type it because it's an object. We should type it there outside. So the joke itself, you want to type it with what? The joke what? Interface. So in this now, if you do now joke dot, I should be able to get what? The joke itself there. Then the second thing, I want to display the rating. So the rating there should be now our joke dot what? The rate. So we can call that rate there. Then the next thing we want to do, so on this button, I want to listen on what? On click what? Event. So on click event, we want to do something, which is now calling a callback function, which is this, and calling this now increase what? Because this is for liking. So this is a function, we want to pass it there. So this increase function expect an ID so that you can be able to increase one like for a specific what? That joke we are having. So it should be now the joke we have passed dot what? The ID of that joke. Same case for decrementing or disliking what? That joke. So just inside here, we want to have that decrement. So this should be decrement what? Rate. So this now, whatever is happening, if I call this component, I should pass the joke, the increment function, and decrement what? Function, then the joke. So we should also type the other, these two function. So how do we type function? So we have a comma there. We call the increase what? Rate, this function here. So this function expect what? A number, which is ID, right? So we need to pass that ID there and type that what? Number, of data type number. Then that function does not return anything. So we can just return what? Void. So that is the return type of what? that function. The same case with decrement what? Function. So the decrement function, that is what we want to have there. We want to type it. So it's a function that will expect a what? An ID, which is of data type what? Number. Then the return type of this is what? Void. That way. So we have fully now typed all the props. So we have typed the joke with the interface we have here. Then if we have typed this, so we can summarize this by using now the interface prop or the joke component props. How can we do that? You know how we can summarize this instead of having everything in one line? Who has an idea how we can do that?
Create a type.
Come again?
Create a separate type.
Write a separate type. So are you able to help us to write that? Should it be a type or an interface?
No, it should be a type, not an interface.
Why? What did we say? What did we say about the difference between a type and an interface?
Oh, I've seen it should be an interface because it's an object.
Yes. So what we should do now here, we have the first interface there. Then we can have another what? Interface. So this interface can be joke what? Props. Interface can be that. Then it's an object. So the first key of that object is now the joke. So this joke should be typed with this joke now. So we type that joke there. Then the next thing is now the increase what? Rate. So this, we should cut it from here or whatever you have, everything we have here. So we just copy it and paste it there. Then the same case with what? The last one here. So we can have it there, then remove everything and have now this as a what? Joke what? Props. And with that, we have minimized whatever we have here. Are you getting something up to that point? So I have defined two interfaces. So the first is the joke itself, which has an object itself, which is the ID, joke, and what? Then I have defined a what? Another joke props, which is now whatever you are passing here. Then this interface should have now the joke, the increment, and decrement what? So the increment is a function. So the property of that function is the ID that we are passing. So and it's a number. Then that function is returning what? Nothing. Remember the void function. And the same case with this. Then this joke now we can type it here. Or we can do another way of typing. We have our joke prop. Instead of typing our props, we can type the component itself. So we remove it from there. Then the joke component itself, we type this component by doing that, then calling the React library. So React library, we want to type it. This is a functional component, right? Instead of class. So we can call the React functional component. So dot rf indicates it's a React what? It should be RC, React functional what? Component. So it should be FC, not RC. So it's a React of type what? A functional what? Component. If you are writing the class component, we should be typing it with the CC, like class component. But for this, it should be of what? The functional what? Component. Then we call the generic symbols, the greater than and equal, less than. Then inside there, we can pass what? our props, this one. So if we pass it there, we should see the error going away. So there are two ways of typing your functional component, either using the React, then calling the functional component. So it represents what? The type of a what? Function what? Component can optionally receive type argument that can represent the properties of that what? That component is receiving. So the props for that component accepts. So these are the props that the function does what? Expect. So you can type it that way or the other way, which is the common way that you have been typing or what. So you can do it that way. So let's just go with this. And now we try to render this component in our what? app.tsx. So where is our component is already exported. So this one just below here. We can even not first of all to import the reducer to, we should because of the jokes. So this one now we were to check whether you have jokes, which is now the initial value we have here. If we have those jokes, we want to do what? To map those jokes. So to map each joke, then once we map those joke up here, remember how we rendered a list. So we call what now? The joke what? Component. So we call the joke component from the component folder. Then it's a self-closing what? Component. So this self-closing component expect what? The three what? Props, which is the joke, the increment rates, and the decrement what? Rates. So how should we pass that? So the first prop is what? The joke. So this joke, we should pass what? The joke we are mapping here. Are you together? So this joke is of, we are yet to type that. So it's already, the TypeScript is typing our joke, this one, but we can explicitly type that joke there with our interface. Remember, you already have the interface at the top. So that is what we are typing here. So then we pass the joke. Then the second argument or the property is what? Increase what? Rate. So, and the other one is what? Decrease what? Rates. So these are functions that will be happening. So in this side here, we can have the two what? The functions. So at the top, we need to have the two functions. So the const, this can be increment rate, which is an arrow function. Maybe we can have it that way. And also we can have another what? Function, which is decrement function. Decrement rate, which is also an arrow function that way. So these two functions is what we'll be passing in these two. So increase rate, we want to pass the increase rate function. If it's decrease rate, we want to pass what? The decrease what? Rate. So we have our components, and if you check well in our what? Application, we already mapped the three what? Components or the jokes we have. So the first one, the second one, the third one. Then remember we are passing the two. So the component has the joke itself and a div for the two button for disliking and what? Liking the two. So I want, whenever I click the like button, I want to increase what? The rating. If I click the dislike, I want to decrease what? I want to do what? Decrease. That is what I want. Maybe we can have an H2 to maybe display a message here. So in this div, we can have maybe jokes for you that way, to have that the three jokes there. So once we do that, we want to have to work on this to increase and decrease what? Functions. Where when I click this, I want to do something. So how can we do that? So in our reducer, we want to have those switch cases. So let me comment this. We want to have a first case. I will be having a form where I can add what? A new joke. That is why I'm having this as the first what? Case of returning the jokes we have. Then we can pass another what? What should we pass in this return? So we want to spread the initial jokes, which is now the initial state, and then what we want to do in this initial state. We want to add a new what? Joke. What should we do? Okay, so let's first of all remove the case for adding a what? A new joke. Let's work with the increase and decrease what? Joke. So those are the type actions I want to do what? So I want to have the case for doing what? Increment what? Increment what? Jokes likes. So this joke like, we want to do what now? So we want to return. What do we want to return? Remember, these jokes are in array form, and we need to check the actual array or the actual joke we want to increment. We don't want an instance we are clicking this right button and we are incrementing the rate of this joke. We want to have the specific what? The joke we want to do that. So how can we do that? So on the return, we want to call the jokes we have here, this one, which is now the jokes. So these jokes are array. So we can do a map to map those jokes. So we call the map function. And this map function, remember, we want to pass now each joke. You want to call the jokes map and pass each joke on this callback function. So on that callback function, you want to do an if statement. So we want to check the joke we are mapping. Remember, you already have that joke, this interface. So we can call the joke we are mapping dot ID of that ID, and we equate or check whether the ID matches the action dot what? The ID. So this action will be passing something we call the ID. So with this action, remember it's a what? An object. So that is what I want to do. So I can type this joke action with a now type alliance. So just the top here, I can have a type alliance. So type, I can call it joke action. So this joke action can have, we can use the union type. So we can have the first type to be this of this type. So open the curly braces. So I want to have that action there. And maybe I want to have another type there, which is another object and another what? Type. Remember the union type. So this joke type, the type action can be of any of these three I'm adding there. So these three are the actions that I want to operate. So the first action should be now the type. So this type, I want to be this under what? A joke. We'll use it later, but I want it to be there. And this joke, add joke, you want to have two things, the type and the what? a new joke will be adding. So let me just leave it that way, and we'll work on it later when be adding a new joke. But the one I want us to check, so this new joke is of this type, this joke here. Then the second type now is our increment what? Type action. So this type should be which now? Increment what? Increment, we can have it the action name we have here, which is this name here. Increment what? Joke. So when incrementing, remember it's a function we are having where this, the increment, we are passing what? The ID. So in our reducer, we should pass the type and what? The ID. We want to do what? To increment of the joke we want to increment. So that ID should be of type what? Number. So these things should be of the same when decrementing what? So we can copy this and have this type here. This should be now decrement. So we have the three types. So let me just put them here at the bottom. So you have the first type, the second, and so we are using the union type just to make sure this type can be take the three what types, either the type under joke, type increment, and type what? Decrement. So in our increment, like this one, you want to check or map all the jokes. Then once we do that, so remember this action should be type of this now action here. So this action, instead of having this object here, should be of this joke what type action there to avoid the issues. So this, we are checking the joke ID, the one we are mapping, then we are equating with the action type. So the action type is this increment what? Joke likes. And remember we have this ID. So we can equate those two. And if it returns true, that means we are getting the actual what? The joke we want to do what? To increment. So what can we do with that joke? So we open the curly braces, then we return what? We return the joke. So the object, that one, we spread the joke again, we have. And once we spread, we want to get the column for rate. So the rate, we want to do a what? For the joke itself, then dot what? The rate, and incremented by what? By 1. If we do not have that joke, we want to return that joke there. So that's whatever is happening. So if we ever now click increment what? Joke like, we are passing this type of action, this one increment. And remember we are passing a what? An ID. So what we should do, we are mapping through the jokes we have here, checking each joke with an ID and equating them with the ID that the action did what? Passed. If they match, that means you are getting the actual what? Joke. We want to increment the rate. So if they match, we want to return what? Now the joke we have, the one we are checking or equating the ID, we access the rate column or the rate key and do what? Increment that by what? By 1. So let's use this now in our index. So in our app.tsx, we need to check something. So if I do this, an argument of this, it's not assignable to these parameters. So, and the fine is not did this. I think this type should not be there. Then the other thing, the issue, where is the issue coming from? So you have the joke, then we have a dispatch. So we are able to use that dispatch and the joke reducer. So in this increase rates, that is where you want to use our what? Our dispatch. So the increase rate, remember this is the function, we should do that. So what should we do in this increase rate? Remember the function expect an ID. So this function, whenever we click that function in our job component, this one, we are passing what? We need to pass a what? An ID. So in our app.csx, we should pass that ID there, and it should be of data type what? Number. Even on the decrease rate, we should have that ID there, which is of type what? Number. So the increase rate, what should we do? We should call the dispatch what? Function now. So the dispatch function. So the dispatch, we want to dispatch a what? A type action. So that action should be what? Increase what? The one we have here. So let me have this in a separate file. So whenever we click the increase rate function in this component where we have this function on this button, the like button, this one, we want to pass a what? To call the increase what? Rate function. And this rate function expect a what? An ID. So whenever now we click that in our app.csx here, we pass the ID and we call the dispatch. So the dispatch is now the one we dispatch the action for what? Incrementing what? So in our dispatch, we should now pass the type, which is now this type of what? Action, which is our action. Increase what? This one, increment what? That is what we should pass there. Then open close the curly braces. Remember the dispatch expects two arguments, which is now the increment and a what? An ID. So this should be now comma, then we pass that ID that is coming in this increase what? Rate. So with that, we still have an issue with the joke reducer. Let's see where the issue could be coming from. So the dispatch cannot find the name dispatch. Oh, this useReducer should be at the top. You cannot call the dispatch before defining what? That dispatch. So this dispatch should be at the top of your what? Function. Actually, this should be there. And these, the two function, we can just drop them below the use what? That. Then what else are we missing? So we have the dispatch, the ID. So it expects one argument. Oh, so we should pass it as an action. So instead of having it outside, it should be inside, then comma the ID. So the dispatch now expects the increment and ID of whatever we are doing. So the joke reducer is where now we are having an issue with. We are importing it and using it here. So an argument, joke, action, this is not defined, parameter, and this and this. So let's see where the issue could be coming from. So the dispatch, the use reducer, then the joke reducer. So on our joke reducer, we are exporting that joke reducer. And this function, of course, is returning something. and that something should be this array joke. So we should type it with our joke interface and should return array of that joke that way. What else are we missing? So the joke, the function lack an ending what? Return statements. Okay, so let's first of all have the default what? Case. So the default case should return a what? The default case should return a what? These what? Jokes. We are returning those jokes, and with that, in our app.csx, the issue has been resolved. So once we do that now, we have the two functions. So the first function is dispatching the increment what? Joke likes. Then we are passing the ID so that we can use that ID to check, to cross-check the joke in our array and the ID that is coming from where? The action, the one we are passing in this type increment. So if we do this now in our first joke hub, the joke with rating 0, if I click this rate, I'm incrementing it by what? By 1. That is what is happening. So in this increase rate function, we are dispatching an increment what? Joke likes, then the ID. So whatever is doing now, we are returning the jokes we have here. Then we are checking each ID of the joke we are mapping and equating with the ID that we are passing in our function. If they match, that means we have the actual what? Joke we want to increment. So what are we returning? We are returning what? The joke. We are spreading that joke, this one. We are checking the rate column. Then that joke column, we want to increment the rate by what? By 1. So in this joke we have here, we are taking this column and taking this rate and incrementing by 1. That is what is happening. If I do that, I'm doing what? Incrementing that. So let's do the reverse of this. When I dislike, I want to decrement this. So it should be the same what? Implementation, but now should be a minus, right? So this case should be the same. I am having here. I should paste it there. Instead of increment should be what? Decrement. Then instead of adding 1, we should subtract what? 1. Are you together? So on the function, where is the function to decrement? So we should dispatch which now type? We should call the dispatch function, then pass our object. So which type should we pass now? We should pass what? The decrement what? The decrement joke, right? Then the ID of the what? The joke we want to do what? To decrement. So whatever is happening now, we are doing this. So we are taking our joke again, checking whether they are the same, then reducing the joke rate with 1. So if I do this now in my application and do this, I should be able now to reduce the rating. If I want to increase, the same. If I want to decrease, the same. So that is how you work and have that dispatch. So the other dispatch we want to do is now to add a new joke. So how can we do that? So in our div, this div at the top, we want to have another div for a form to do how we can add that new joke. So we can have a div here. So this div, remember the issue of returning one component. So we need to have the empty fragment wrapping all our div to avoid that issue of React. Then on this div, maybe this text can move on this div there. Then below here, we want to have a form. So this form element, we don't want any action, but inside this form, we want to have an input what? Field. So this input field should be of type text and maybe a placeholder. So a placeholder to say what? Enter what? A new joke, something like that. So let me close this. So on that input, you want to have that and maybe some styling to have the margin and padding to have a bigger where you can type what? Your new joke. So once we have that, we want to have a button to do what? To submit. So this button should be under what? A joke. So that is what I want to have here. So whenever I add this, I want to add this new joke here. Then this button should be of type submit. Submit. And then the input. I don't think we should have anything. So whatever we need to do now is to have a function to do what? To submit what? This what? Form. So we can have a function here, const what? Maybe under what? Submit. So this under submit, we can have it as an arrow function. So we should have another equals there. So this under function, remember a form, we can listen which event. Which event can we listen on form? Remember our DOM manipulation, we had a form and there was an event we were listening. Which event? On what? On? Yes, on submit. So the on submit function, we want to pass a JSX function, which is now this under what? Submit. We can pass that under submit function there. So whenever we click this button, add joke, we are calling this function with the help of the on submit event in this what? Form. Are you together up to that point? So on this now under submit, we want to do a what? Implement the adding a what? A new what? So remember it's an event, so we can pass that event there, which is can be E or the full name, which is what? Event. And that event should be typed. So how did we type this on our DOM? It was an HTML form what? Element. So how can we type that? So we can use now the React. We can call the React library. It has those types. If you check on the package.json, we have types for React, this one. So once we call that React, we want to type with these form events. Remember, it's a form, the one we have here. So we can call the form event, and that form event is of type what? HTML what? Form element. Remember the way we typed this. So HTML form what? Element. And with that, we have typed our what? Event. The next thing was to prevent default what? Submission. How did we do that? We used e.prevent what? We can use the e or the event to do that. So the e prevent dot default. Why is it auto completing? I don't want to be like that. So event prevent what? Can we remember this? from our DOM manipulation classes. The purpose of this function was to do what? So this can be just E, so that we can not have that issue. So E.prevent. So the E.prevent does the work of preventing your form to cause a page reload when you are submitting your what? Form. So the next thing was to do what? If you can remember from that DOM manipulation, you are to target now the input. We have this input. How can we target that input? So we can target by targeting our event, which is now this function here. So we can use the bracket. We target the event, then we want to do a target. So that target, I want to type it as a what? An HTML what? Form input. HTML form input, or the form element can be that. And that target, we want to target the element, and those elements want to target the first index of that element. Remember, the form element, it's an array, so we want to target the first element, which is now this input. That is the only input we have at it, and it is on index what? 0. Then, of course, we need to type this with HTML what? Input element. So the first is a form element. We are targeting the form, which is of type form element. The second thing we are targeting is now the actual element of the first index of this what? Form element, which is this one, which is an input. Now this should be an HTML input what? Element. So these are just typing these inputs. Then remember it's returning something, so we can store it in a variable called what? Input. So once we get that input, we get now the actual value, whatever we are typing in this. So if we do this and we do that, we can target that value there. So how can we do that? So this can be now our input. So this input variable, if we target now dot value, we are targeting now the actual thing we are typing here. Then we can use the dot trim function to just to remove extra spaces between whatever you are typing here. Then this should now be stored also in a variable. So const, maybe now can be the new joke we want to do what? To end. So with that now, we are sure now this, whatever you're typing here, it's captured by this what? Variable. We want to confirm this control alt row. If we do that and we try to do this in our form, let's try and inspect so that we can see the console. If we type something here and add joke, we are getting what? That value, this one. Whatever you are typing here, maybe the new joke. If we click enter, we are getting what? That value. That is how we are targeting that actual value with this. First of all, getting the event. We want to target the element, which is the input. Once we target that, we want now to get the input, now get the dot value. So the value is whatever we have in that input. And that is what we are storing where? Here. So once we have that value, we can now go ahead to add a new what? Joke. So how can we do that? So if we have that joke there, we do a what now? A dispatch what? Action. So what should we pass here now on the dispatch action? So this dispatch should have now, let's come back in our joke reducer. So we have only two dispatch. So we need to have another what? Action for adding a what? A new what? Joke. this one. So add a new joke. So we can have it at the top. So we can have a case for under what? A new what? Joke. So how can we implement that? We want to return, this is a simple thing because we are just using an in-memory database, whatever we have here. So we are just appending a new joke in this initial joke. So that is whatever is happening. So here we just need to return an array. We spread those jokes. We have here the jokes. Then we add the new joke, which is now the action. Remember our action as this what? So this action, remember this action we are passing. It has the add joke action and the new what? Joke. So we can pass that now a new joke there. And with that now, we can be able to use this dispatch type of add joke in our app.tsx. So where you have our function, we can pass the type. So this type should be what? Under what? Joke. Then the next thing is to add what? Now this new joke, this one. Whatever we are having what? The new joke, this one. So this new joke, we want to construct an object. So this should be an object. So this object should be now be equal or the same whatever we have here. So this joke should have an ID, a joke, and a what? A rating. How can we construct that object? So we can have the first being the ID. So we can just have the date function just to be our new ID. We want to have each joke to have a what? A new or a unique ID. So we can use the time when that joke was being created. Then the next thing on that object is what? Joke. So the joke value should be now the new text we have here. The new joke what? Text is whatever you are typing on that what? Input. So it should be the new joke. Then of course, new joke cannot have what? The rating should be what? 0. So the rate should be 0. Are you together up to that point? And once we do that, we are sure now whenever we dispatch this action of add and joke, we are passing this new joke, this object, which has the new ID, the joke, which is now the text we are typing from form input, then the rate should be what? 0. So if we now try this, let's see. So if I enter a new joke, so a new joke like that. If I enter this, I'm getting out new joke at the what? At the bottom. If I add another one, another joke is being added. If I add another one, I'm adding out a new joke. If I rate that, I should be able to rate each what? Joke. If I want to dislike, I can dislike each what? Joke. So remember the form, we should clear what? The form. How can we clear that form? So right after we do what? Adding that joke, we can call the input dot value to be an empty what? To be an empty what? String. That way. If we do now come here, refresh and a new joke, we are getting an empty what? Input. If we add a new joke, we have a new joke that way. If I like, I add new what? Like in these jokes. If I refresh, I get the initial jokes we have without the one we have added because we are just using the in-memory, whatever we have here. This is the initial jokes. Even if I reload, so our state comes back to the initial what? State, which is this one. So that is how you can use reducer. And it's quite very easy because you only need to have that reducer and know the actions you want to define. So for your assignment in the afternoon, I want you to play along around with this and maybe have a button to delete a joke. So here in our case, so in a case here, you should have a case for what? Delete what? Delete what? Joke. Then we implement that here, which is now should return something. So that return something, you should use it now in your joke component. Maybe after this button, you can have another button there, which has a what? A delete what? Instead of this dislike, should have a delete what? That joke. Then this delete button now should instead of decreasing what? Should be delete what? So can be like that. Delete joke. So you delete that joke. How can we do that? So this function should also be included in our what? Prop. So you can have it there. So I don't want to give you a Mwakenya or now you can do this, but I'm guiding you. So that is why you should add the what? The props for what? Deleting a joke. Then once you do that, so this issue should go away. Then in our app.tsx, we should have another what? Function to do what now? Function to do what? To delete a what? Joke. Whenever now I click this joke, delete button, I should delete this joke. That is what you should implement. So you should have that delete button here or the function, which now you will be passing in our joke what? Component. So here you will be passing another property, which is what? Delete what? Joke. And that delete joke should have the ID of whatever you are doing what? So there, that is why you should pass the function you define here. So that function is that we should pass here. So let me comment this. So you should pass your function there. So are you together up to that point? So I want you to, in the joke reducer, implement the reducer for deleting a joke. Then that deleting a joke should also be added in our action here. So we should have now another what? Action here for deleting a what? A joke. That's what we should pass it here. Then in our joke component, you should have that button that does the deleting. Then that deleting should be in our interface to avoid the issues of type in our what. So it should be another now property here, which is what? Delete what? Joke. So this joke should be in this type. Then in our app.tsx, you pass that as a prop. Remember, it's a property here. This delete joke. It's the one you should pass in this joke component. Then this property of deleting should have this function of deleting what? The joke. So whenever now I click this button, I should delete this what? Joke. It took it up that point. And maybe you can display them in ascending or descending order. Maybe the joke that has the highest rating can be the first to be displayed. You can do that in the what? In the joke component before you map. Where is that mapping? I think it's in our app.tsx where we are mapping. Before mapping, we have another array method called sort or filter. So I want also you can implement that. So before mapping here, we have dot sort function. So the sort function can be able to sort your array from the highest to the lowest. So you can have that function, then you have now dot what? Map. That is how you use the both the same together. You sort first, then you map. So the sort is just a function that returns the sorted. So that is where you compare, or you will define whether you start from the lowest to the highest, or the highest to the what? The lowest. So that is what I want also you to implement on. So I want to stop at that point.